Good morning. This is the Family Business Conference breakout. I'd like to welcome everyone. Our specific topic will be growing a family business by acquisition. My name's Tim Feldhausen. I am a corporate attorney at Davis & Kilthau, and I work on M&A and general business acquisition practice. And I'm joined today by Chris Howell, who is the CEO of Tweet Garrett. Chris, if you would like to say give us a little background about yourself and your business.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. So Chris Howell, CEO of Tweet Garrett Mechanical. We're about 130-year-old family business. So I fortunately don't have the pressure of being third generation, but I'm already on the fourth generation. I am a recovering attorney. I spent about 10 years as an attorney in California before I came back and joined the family business. So I look at it through a little bit of a different lens, but I'm really excited about our growth and the trajectory that we've been on.
Super. So one of the things that's of interest, I think, these days is we have a variety of businesses going through sort of a transition cycle, coming up through either the founder's generation or perhaps second or third generation family members who are, we'll call them baby boomers, who are in a position that they're thinking maybe the right time is to sell. But we also have other family businesses that are thinking maybe it's the right time to grow our business or branch in new areas. And there's a lot of things to consider when you're thinking about branching out or creating a new business or even acquiring a business. So I guess the question is, people talk about, do I grow organically? Do I find new markets by starting a new subsidiary or another entity, starting from scratch in another location with an add-on, so to speak, or do I grow through acquisition? And those questions kind of go through every business, every successful business owner, be they a family business or not. So how is that figured into Tweet Garrett's business model?
Yeah, good question. So, when going back a little bit to when I joined, my dad really had a decision to make. His decision was either, do I sell the business? Do we try to keep it within the family? Do I try to transition to a different ownership employee group? And when I told him that I was interested in coming back, we started to look at the world through a little bit of a different lens. And that was, I wasn't going to leave my job at a law firm in California just to come back and keep things status quo. And I really found that the business had grown to a place where we were sort of in no man's land. We were too big that we couldn't compete at sort of the really low cost, small customizable side of the market. And we weren't big enough where we could really compete on some of these larger sort of mega construction projects where you needed bigger staffs of engineers and virtual designers and modelers. So we either needed to scale up or scale down. So we have spent a lot of the last 5 years really creating a strategy and a philosophy around infrastructure, building infrastructure, creating good processes, making sure that we have every step of our value stream documented, and sort of automated so that we have better efficiency across our value stream. And once we do that, as we've done that, we found that we sort of have a scalable model. And we recognize that Wisconsin is a very competitive market. And that if we're going to grow, we probably need to do that, grow beyond the infrastructure building that we've been working on. We need to do that through acquisition.
Tell us a little bit about the challenges of approaching that from a family business model.
Sure.
Obviously, there are, your father probably ran the business a little bit differently. Over generations, things change. How does that, these are big decisions to make. going
Sure.
into shifting into the next mode, so to speak, is not an easy thing to do. And you add an extra layer of complexity when we're talking about family businesses. So how does that family dynamic work out?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of components to that. The first one is just risk, just the risk, risk profile in general. And when I think about the business from my dad's perspective, his risk tolerance was a little bit lighter, but he also took on a lot of risk when this first started. When the business transitioned from my grandfather to him, my grandfather died at 56. It was my father's father-in-law, and he had to figure out a way to scratch and claw to keep the business moving, and took on debt and had to buy shares, and that's a very different position than what I'm coming into. And so his risk profile for taking additional risk on other people really was never there. He wanted to grow slowly and methodically and organically, and has done that. My risk tolerance is different. I don't know if that's through my time as being an attorney, if it's as a result of my age, or it's just a result of I'm more comfortable with something like an acquisition than he was, but it's just something that was different. The second piece is cultural. And as we've been more deliberate and intentional about our culture, really, really solidifying our core values and what are the great things that make Tweet Barrett great, and that we're vocal and transparent about those things, it makes it easier for us to look at acquisitions with that in mind. And I don't think we've always had a great culture at Tweet Barrett, but we weren't out in front in talking about it and defining what the core values are. But once you know what those ingredients are, you can kind of go out and look for like for like businesses. And so the more effort that we've put into defining our culture, the easier it's been for us to think about acquisitions, because we can make sure that there's a good match. And then the last component is just technical. Acquisitions are challenging, as you know, and as everyone knows, and as a business, you need to start trying to, or have a desire to want to develop a core competency around some of those skills, and that means more people, that means more training, that means more process, that means a lot of extras, and you have to sort of have the stomach for that if you want to do it. And I'm not sure that we had that in the past, but are starting to develop it now.
What's interesting is as I hear you talking about these various points, they make an awful lot of sense for a business that's looking to acquire. On the flip side of that, for every business that's acquiring, there's an acquired business. There's a business that is, I think, doing that same calculus, but on the other side, right? They're the ones who are looking to be, I don't want to say swallowed up, but it's a marriage, right? It's all of this. I kind of look at this, the analogy that I tell clients is it's like a marriage. There's a dating, there's an engagement, there's sort of the marriage and the life cycle, offspring, and eventually death. But you look at this whole life cycle of things and you say, well, there's the other half to this union. And I think they often bring something great to the table when you look at it from your perspective. They certainly don't cease to exist, but they get to be part of the same culture that you've established. And there are some sharing of values and things like that, as the acquired company looks at it, may make it very attractive for them as well. So they're doing the same kind of math, just in reverse.
Yeah, I mean, it takes. I mean, so we did an acquisition that completed in the first August 1st, and so we're a couple months into it at this point. And one of the things that I think about is it just takes a lot of humility. it takes humility to be able to say, to look across the table and say, we don't have this all figured out. You might think we do because we're the larger business and we have processes and infrastructure and all these things in place, but there are great things that made you great that we want to learn about. And conversely, we want you to challenge us. And if you can't go, we didn't go into this acquisition thinking we knew everything, thinking we were just going to do a bolt on and that everything was going to fit seamlessly into the way that we operate. We went in with a little bit of humility to understand that we can get better through this as well. And I think that has played itself out because there's a lot of this business. The smaller businesses that we will continue to look at have a lot to teach us because they've kept their culture really strong. They've kept a really familial feel to the business. Owners love them because of that. Employees are very loyal, and as the owner, speaking of the owners of the business that we were working with, they have a couple options. They can sell to a private equity company, which doesn't seem to be a really good fit for the things that I just described. They can look for another business within their field, or they can try to figure out a way to sell to the employees, and that comes with complexity as well, trying to figure out financing and changing the culture to more of an ownership culture and making sure you have people that have been developed in order to take on that responsibility. So we feel really fortunate for being in the position that we're in, where we've been building this infrastructure where we feel like we can support them, and then added hopefully have the humility to be able to make them feel welcome and like they're an important part of our business.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about this acquisition that you've done. My understanding is this is a relatively new thing for you, and you've gone through the process in the acquisition. I'm sure there's some lessons that have been learned. Obviously, things that have went very well. Things perhaps you tweak for the next time. One of the things I often tell clients is if we're going to do an acquisition, the first thing you want to do is get your team in place, right? Get a full team of people who can help you with various parts of the transaction. A lot of your knowledge is in-house, right? We can't tell you exactly how to, how the fit's going to go or how, what decisions to make, but, certainly we can use our experience to give you some ideas and to provide a little bit of guidance. What are your thoughts on the importance of having that kind of a team in place?
Yeah, I mean, you had given us that guidance, and I think that we found that to be absolutely true. I mean, I think some of the other guidance you gave was that, one size fits one, that no deal is really the same. And as a business that has been trying to create a lot of good process and consistency and eliminate variability, that's a challenge. This was a challenge for us going into a place where we didn't have good process. We didn't know what the outcomes were going to be. So we needed that team to help teach us, right? So as much as we went into this wanting to have an outcome where we learned about, where we ended up with an acquiring business, we also went into this wanting to learn so that we could start building up these core competencies within Tweak Garrett so that we could potentially do this again. And having a team to lead us through that process, to be able to get feedback on what worked well, what didn't work well as we were moving through it, so that we can establish ourselves we can be at a better place for the next one. Really fits sort of our continuous improvement philosophies, and I think sets us up really well if we ever decide to do this again.
Great. How about one of the things that often scares people is the due diligence process, right? This is where you get to, the car looks shiny on the outside, but now you're actually going to take a peek under the hood and get an opportunity to see what's there and how that might fit and how that might not fit. your due diligence process, if you could give me a few thoughts on, how you approach that, how that made a difference for you, and what perhaps lessons that you learned on your end from that.
Sure. I think we went in thinking we needed to do scorched earth. And I think that if I think back to the original due diligence list that I worked on and put together, it was, we asked for everything under the sun, and that's not really something that is feasible, especially if you're, acquiring a smaller mid-sized business. And I think what we ultimately started to understand is as well as we were prepared and as much time as we put into that list, it didn't necessarily match reality, and it needed to be more conversational. And once we got past that sort of stopping to make sure that every item and box was checked off, and we started to have conversations around what do you have, when can we expect it, the things started moving much more quickly, and it was more effective once we started to engage with the business around expectations.
Yeah, the due diligence process, I think, could be one of the things that it makes, from my experience, clients get a little bit nervous on, because they're finding things. They've executed a letter of intent. They understand that's typically not binding, other than the standard no shop confidentiality provisions, things like that. But this is the time where they first realize that things are getting pretty serious for this transaction, and you're getting information about the other company. Some of it is really a sort of a no go kind of thing, but the rest of it is all about where do things fit in the company, right? How does this, you're really getting to see how does this work, how the nuts and bolts come together. So due diligence can often be a rather scary thing for both sides. From the seller's perspective, obviously they're showing their secrets and showing things that they, showing the real state of the company, and they don't want to they don't want to scare a buyer away, but at the same time, they don't want it to look too bad. So due diligence can be a tough process to negotiate, not only with the folks across the table, but I also think that often, internal stakeholders can look at this process and say, particularly the people that you have in-house in perhaps your finance, your operations, your administration, your ordering, some of these people get a chance to look at this new business that you're looking to acquire, and they're going to have their own take. Mentally, they're going to have their own preconceived notions about what it should be. And I think that may give rise to some friction, or some, or at least a process, an invitation to a process that starts the melding of the two companies, right? You have to deal with internal stakeholders on your side to, in essence, sell this transaction, as well as the folks across the table. Have you, what's been your experience on the transaction that you've done, dealing with the internal stakeholders on Tweet Garrett's side about this new transaction, and how how this comes together, so to speak, and particularly how their individual areas will mesh?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we really were deliberate about how we were going to utilize our internal team. We had team leads over a number of the different sort of specialty areas. We had somebody that was going to oversee the IT due diligence and integration, the accounting due diligence and integration, the HR due diligence, operational due diligence and integration. And by empowering people to oversee those areas, they really had to engage. We tried to avoid a data dump. I didn't want people I didn't want there to just be this massive amount of data and people just had to sit at their desk and go through pages and pages, because that would have been the time for them to develop either some bias or preconceived ideas about what was or was not reality. And they needed to engage potentially with me and then translated to the business that we were looking to acquire. So there were a lot of questions, but there was a lot of back and forth on, and we were getting answers very quickly. So my view is always to empower the teams from the very beginning and set a good path from the very beginning, so that we don't fall into that trap of someone just sitting at their desk going through documents thinking, why are we even doing this? Because this acquisition doesn't fit for these various reasons, and those various reasons may or may not actually be reality.
And that certainly, that's not an easy challenge from a management perspective to bring that kind of viewpoint. The empowerment viewpoint is something that can put some people out of their comfort zone very quickly. And it takes, I think, a leadership challenge to be able to tell people, no, this is you're an integral part of this, and you're empowered to help make this happen. I think if you make it a positive thing, as it sounds like you've done, makes the process go a lot smoother. So, one of the challenges particularly that you faced during this whole transaction is this came about during the COVID pandemic. This thing really did, you had additional challenges that weren't just challenges relating to the normal question of is this the right step for us? Is this the right time for us? Is this the right fit for us? But we've got some external things that are happening as well that are unique. In this case, it's the pandemic, but other times other companies have faced other interesting challenges, and they could be something within the type of market sector that company's in, the political context, the economic context, and things like that. So that, I'm going to guess, that probably caused a little bit of late night and perhaps some further discussion or further thought on your part. Is this the right thing at this time?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of discussion. I mean, this pandemic, the story's still being written. And so we engaged, we started negotiations on this towards the end of 2019, and into 2020, we had some continued discussions, and it was moving in the right direction. And in early March, we were ready to go with an LOI, and then all of a sudden the world changed very quickly. And so we had to put the brakes on for a little bit in order to really start to understand how this was going to impact not only their business, but our business, and what a joint future was going to look like. How were our customers impacted? So there was some challenges there that we just didn't foresee. And being one of, not having done this very much, that added to the complexity from my end of it. Just, I was looking for precedent. I was looking for, factors, environmental factors or economic factors to make me feel comfortable that this was okay, that this was the right decision for the future of our business. And there really just wasn't much there. So at the end of the day, we had to go back to this idea that the businesses fit well together, that they're a good business. We're aligned culturally. We look at customers in the same way. Our teams are going to work well together, and that we felt really good about the assimilation. Had there been questions there, we absolutely would not have moved forward. But because we felt so strongly that this was a good fit, we felt like we were in a position where we could endure any of the potential challenges that the pandemic imposed or beyond.
One of the things that struck me when I watched, and you've just talked about it briefly a few minutes ago, that I think contributed to the success of this whole venture on your part was your team-based approach, right? The team and empowerment model that you used, rather than a top-driven, this is how we're doing it and everybody get on board, so to speak. I think that contributed to the ability of your company to be agile in those circumstances to be able to figure things out quickly, make the assessments quickly, and adapt to changing circumstances. And I think that from an outside perspective, I looked at that approach and said, that's one that I see can work very, to someone's advantage in terms of a management model when you're in the space of acquisitions that can be very, very, very useful to have. And I think that's a unique, I don't know if it's a unique model, but I think it's a very attractive model to look at in terms of structuring your business so that you're acquisition ready on the acquiring side.
Yeah, there's a couple different schools of thought about leadership and management, and I ascribe to one, which is, and part of it is due to the fact that I didn't come up through the construction trades, right? I used to be an attorney, so I look to do consensus building often. It wouldn't be very smart of me, having not lived in the trenches, to go to our teams and say, hey, look, I found a company that we're going to acquire, and we're moving forward, and here it is. Because I don't know what I don't know. So the very first thing we did here is we went to the team that sees this business the most, that has the best feel for how they are and has a good understanding of how our customers view them. And I said, this is the opportunity. We're not going to move forward unless I have your blessing and consent and your excitement, because this doesn't, if you're just, if you're just sort of blasé about this, doesn't make any sense for me to move forward. If you're excited, if you think this can help your teams and your business, and that we can be stronger together, then I will fight for you. I view my job as like a snowplow. I'm just out in front trying to remove obstacles for people. And so by getting their buy-in and excitement really early, made me fight harder. And then once we got to that point, once the operational teams were excited, then it was, we needed to sort of delegate across our executive leadership team to make sure that we had people in the right seats so that we could do this, collaboratively. It just would never work if I'm just trying to jam something through. That's not how we operate.
And I think the other side of the table, the seller can see that same approach. And I think that's an attractive approach to them, to realize that they're going into a circumstance. At the very beginning, you talked about the various options that are out there for a company that's in a transition phase, that's looking to transition. One is one generation of family ownership to the next. Another is a management buyout. Another is an employee buyout. Another is we'll call it a strategic acquisition by someone in the same either geographical area, in the same sort of market segment. And then we'll call it the private equity buyout model, right? Where somebody is owning the company, and it's somebody that in many cases is distant and is looking at this really as from an investment perspective. All have their benefits, all have their drawbacks. But I think if you're a buyer or you're a seller and you have the opportunity to look across the table at the buyer with a management model like this, that is a team-based approach that facilitates input from everyone, and I think incentivizes people to give their best and do their best, I think that makes it attractive from the seller's perspective to know that whoever the seller is, they or their employees are going to be part of a value team moving forward. And then I think that gets us something that you've said a few minutes ago, which is getting the cultures to fit. So I think that's probably one of the big challenges as we went through the transaction process a number of documents were exchanged, and there were the negotiations on fine points in the agreements. But at the end of the day, you're standing at the altar, so to speak, with the other business, and you both say I do, and you now become part of one family, so to speak. That culture is the fit of the culture, or making those two cultures align one way or the other, is, I think, a very, very important part of this whole process. So if you could share with us perhaps some of the lessons that you've learned so far in dealing with the culture, and how you massage that aspect, which can be very tricky sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think it just started with every challenging conversation that we needed to have, and there wasn't many, but every challenging conversation that we decided we needed to have, we just did it personally with the sellers. Maybe that's some of my training as a former attorney, but I didn't want there to be anything lost in translation, and so they saw that if I was concerned about something, that I brought it to them very, very quickly, and they saw that if I was frustrated about something, that I let them know very, very quickly. We also did we invited them to go golfing, like really early in the deal. Just myself and my chief operating officer and the two of the sellers of the business. And it wasn't necessarily to talk about the deal. It was really just to get to know each other and to solidify some of the thoughts that we had been forming about were we a good fit. And so we spent the first 4 or 5, 6 holes just talking about family and talking about life, and then that process started to establish some trust. And as a result of the trust being built, we were in a better spot to really be able to attack some of these issues in a different way. Had there been no trust built, I might not have felt comfortable going to them with some of these issues. I might have wanted to use a different channel. And I might have been more upset about it, or I might have been more emotional. But because we had so much trust built early on, and I felt so comfortable with them, we just cut through it really quickly and really effectively. And that got us to the finish line much quicker.
I'm certainly glad you didn't ask me to go golfing, because I would have gotten my frustration. I'm a terrible golfer, so I would have been as lost in the weeds. So I guess that's a whole issue of trust right there, being able to know that you're not going to get hit with a golf ball from a potential business partner down the road. So but that kind of exercise sounds to me to be very something that does build that trust and does move that relationship forward, or at the very least opens the lines of communications that are necessary to overcome the various pieces in every deal that arise from time to time. There's going to be something that doesn't quite fit in some area or another. There's going to be some bump or some threshold that you're going to have to get over in order to get it done. And it could be all kinds of stuff. So
if the sellers of this business did not trust me or trust our team, then when the acquisition was complete and we talked to them about cultural alignment and assimilation, and you need to trust that you're going to have you're going to be supported. You need, like, if they didn't trust me early on in this deal, then as they made those declarations to their team would have known that, right? So this doesn't work if that trust is not established early. And then as they communicate to their team about how things are going to align, their team knows that they're being honest with them, right? Their team's been working, they're a close-knit family, they've been working together for dozens of years. They know when they're being authentic. And I think they authentically believe that we are a consensus, collaborative type of culture, and that we want to support them, and we will support them, and we'll do it, positively. And it's one thing for me to just say that, but for the sellers of this business to turn around and say that to their team, all of us in lockstep, that just it started things off on just such a different foot. And it's because I think it's because we put some effort into establishing trust really early on.
I'll add to that, as an attorney yourself, or as you say, a recovering attorney. One of the things that I think made this transaction unique is that kind of thing spills over onto the teams that are working on this process, from the financial, legal, accounting, banking, all of those relationships. Those processes of getting to the closing become easier for the professionals who are assisting you when you have fostered that kind of working relationship. It just necessarily spills over onto those that are assisting you in that. It makes their jobs easier. It makes things clearer, and it makes it easier to talk about the issues that arise in every transaction. And I think at the end of the day, it makes it easier to resolve those issues. So I think that has effects beyond the immediate corporations that are involved.
Yeah, I mean, we had a good relationship with you and your firm. We have a good local banking relationship. And the place that we weren't really strong was just sort of in the larger financial advisory piece. And when as you know, we started the deal with the bigger firm out of Chicago, and it just didn't feel right. We didn't have that trust built up, and so we made a decision really quickly to sort of pivot. And that's why we did a lot of the due diligence ourselves. Is we needed to learn this anyway. We didn't have a great relationship with the financial advisory and consulting service out of Chicago, and I didn't feel like our motives were aligned, and I didn't feel like it was going to be a good fit within the deal anyway. So we just made the decision to do it our own, and that came with its own challenges, and that came with its own lessons learned. But we are stronger as a business for having gone through that, and we've started to plant some seeds of these core competencies that I've talked about, so that if we need to do this again, we're in much better shape. We've established roles and responsibilities. We know, who can take on what worked well, what didn't work well. We don't need to just have total reliance on someone else that took care of everything. We have our team in place with your firm, with our local banking partner, and all of our internal teams, and we can just be off and running whenever the next opportunity presents itself.
Well, Chris, that's a lot of interesting information on the lessons that you've learned on working with the team, making sure everybody's sort of singing from the same sheet of music, so to speak. One of the things that I think is still probably a challenge in all this is you've got your professional advisors, you've got your internal structures going. It's still, I think, it can be a challenge within the family to talk about this and to make sure everybody's goals are aligned within the family. We talked very briefly at the beginning about this, but what were some of the biggest challenges that you had in looking at your this transaction from a family perspective, working with your family to decide this, perhaps generational issues, perhaps, I don't know, values issues, but certainly family dynamics and risk tolerances come into play?
Sure. Yeah, that's certainly a big question, but an important one. My dad and I have a great relationship, and we have learned through working together that we need to be more honest with each other. I think we had a family business consultant tell us really early on that we don't know how to fight with each other. And that if we're really going to be honest, we need to resolve tension and conflict. And so we've gotten much better at that. And had we not gone through some of those things, I don't know that we would have been in a good spot to do this acquisition. And part of it is due to the fact that the risk tolerances were different and the views of the world were different. When my dad ran the business, he was the tent pole, so to speak, and everybody was around him and came to him with questions and challenges, and it worked. Everything went up through him, and he made decisions, and it came down. And that's how I think a lot of businesses were run. It's in a large part very similar to the way the business we acquired was run. And so we've developed an ability to transition from that, because I don't feel this is my own personal view. I feel like the business climate is changing. Millennials are the largest percentage of people in the workforce, and to transition from a baby boomer business to a millennial focused business is very challenging. And I believe the best way to do that is to build a bridge, to take the great things about how businesses were run with baby boomer leaders and owners and bridge it to some of the needs of the millennial generation. And it's in acknowledging the great things about both, as opposed to, I think you see a lot in the press, the media, where we just try to figure out ways to disparage each other, or to look for the flaws, or define work ethic through the lens of both. And that doesn't really get you anywhere. So we've successfully bridged our business from the way my dad and his team ran to the way that I think will allow us to be most successful going forward, which is taking some of the great things about the way it was and matching them with this consensus building, team-oriented, collaborative approach. And so as we started to have the discussions with the business we were acquiring, it was really interesting, because I just felt like I was time traveling back 4 or 5 years as they're asking me, how do I approach my team? How do I talk to people about the transition? I'm thinking back to conversations I had with my dad and some of our senior leaders about the need for this bridge. And so it was really nice, because I've made a lot of mistakes, as I worked through some of these challenges with my own father and with his team. It was nice to almost get a second shot at it and say, this is what we've learned. Our business was very similar, so we met them where they were, right? We said, my dad ran the business the same way you did. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is the steps that we need to take in order to start bridging the business to fit into the direction of where we're going. And I think they appreciated that. I think they appreciated that I wasn't there just to tell them how to run their business differently. I think they appreciated that we were on the same path, on the same journey, and that a bridge was possible because we've already done it, and that we had lessons to learn from it. So I think that hopefully that answers some of the question. There was a lot to unpack there, but the generational and cultural pieces absolutely come into play. You just need to put them to the forefront.
And the point that, I see as a lawyer advising people on these kinds of transactions is people think about the generational impacts and the family dynamics in terms of business transition, but they do not often think about that in terms of business growth while you have multi-generation, impacts that are there. So it's not just family generational and generational issues aren't just something to think about when it comes time to think about who the next generation to succeed to the business is. It really does impact future growth. It impacts current operations, and it impacts a number of things. So there's a lot out there, obviously, as you said, to unpack, and I think it's beyond probably the scope of this. We could probably talk for hours on that, but I would like to wrap up perhaps with just one quick question. In terms of lessons learned, what advice might you give another family-owned business that is sort of in your path to and is looking to expand through acquisition, what would be your number one piece of advice to them as they embark on this process of thinking about expanding and doing what you've done?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say just be really deliberate about the process. Not to like, we're not growing for just for growth's sake. We're growing because we had a plan to build infrastructure which would allow us to support additional teams. And so if we had, I had thoughts to just start acquiring businesses 3 or 4 years ago. Had we done that, it would have been a mess. We would be in a really different spot than we are in today. So it feels natural. Not only it feels natural to our employees, our current employees, not to mention the employees that we've just merged with, to make this addition, because our employees knew that we've spent the time and the effort building the infrastructure and processes in place that would allow us to acquire. Had we just done it, they would have looked at it very differently. And we've been talking about it for a while. We said these are some of our growth plans. Some of that is organic, some of that is acquisition, and so for them to see that we're following through on our strategic plan is good for the business as well. So for me, it's all about alignment and deliberateness about how you want to do it. Don't just acquire for acquire's sake, but be deliberate, create excitement and energy within your teams to make sure that it's the right move, and then just be deliberate about how you're going to do it would be the best advice that I think I have at this point.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Chris, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today, taking the time to do it. Thanks for your insight on family businesses and growing through acquisition. And I wish you certainly the best of continued success and best luck as we navigate our sort of post-COVID future. So thanks again.
You. And thank you for all your guidance throughout this. So it's been a pleasure working with you, and we're better off because of it. So happy to help today and any way I can going forward.
Thank you.